Ladies and gentlemen, well, mostly gentlemen, we're back! After possibly literally a year and a half, we return from the ether to assail your eardrums once more. Fresh off the bitter, soul-crushing disappointment of not being able to run Dark Souls 3, I'm your host, Count Chocula. And of course, with me tonight is my co-host, Cock Blocula. Now, Cock, tell me, is it true that the name of the current Scottish independence movement is Sexit? And if not, why not?
It is not. They've gone for the much more tame Indie Ref 2. And no, they did not put Electric Boogaloo, which I think they should have done, but they didn't.
Indie Ref sounds like the name of a low-brow sport racing event that I would normally see the Top Gear hosts competing on.
Tonight on Top Gear.
Now, some of you are probably wondering why we took so long to get here. Well, the answer is because we're lazy shits. The secondary answer is because Luke just won't get on to us, and we had like a date set, not one of those sorts of dates, we had a date to do this setup, and I can't remember if X didn't show, or if Luke didn't show, or if they both didn't show. All I know is that I was there, and two people possibly weren't. So, we're basically just going to try and put a placeholder in to say, hey, we're still alive, and it's currently midnight here, I'm tired, but fuck it, let's try it, and I don't even know if I'm going to bother censoring this stuff because we're all adults here.
Mostly. I hope so.
Now we're going to try to limit ourselves to half an hour and only 10 minutes of talking about each thing. I have a very sexy retro 80s watch, which I'm going to use to time us, and, well, I've blathered on enough. X, say something, please.
Something.
That joke wasn't funny it hasn't been funny any time. Especially
it's never
when
been funny.
I make it all the time, and oh god, I'm too tired for this shit. Anyway, so it's only going to be the two of us for tonight, or this afternoon, depending on which one of the hosts you're using as a reference point. But hopefully next time we will actually have somebody else to talk to and, you know, have an interesting time with. Alright, so I'm starting the timer. I love the 80s beeping, and first thing on our agenda tonight, because I've completely forgotten how to host these things, is the most recent expansion for Star Wars The Old Republic, entitled Tortanic, alternatively Knights of the Fallen Empire. So, I know most of us probably don't play it, but I've heard generally positive things about it, and for a change we actually do have somebody who plays that game with us, and I would like him to tell us about it.
Well, what to say about Knights of the Fallen Empire?
Well, you could try saying words. Those are generally helpful.
Those tend to help, yeah. Most people that I talked to before actually getting the expansion said it was basically KOTOR 3, but kind of not really, but still KOTOR 3. So mixed messages there. I bit the bullet. I subscribed again, and I started playing it.
Question. I thought it was free to play.
The game itself, the vanilla game, no expansions, up to level 50 is free to play, but beyond that you need to pay for the expansions or be a subscriber.
Well, I guess paying for the expansions is pretty reasonable since that's the typical business model. So you can either pay for the expansion or become a subscriber and get the expansion that way?
Well, I believe the way it works is you can buy the Rise of the Hutt Cartel and Shadow of Revan expansions as standalones, but if you want to play Knights of the Fallen Empire, it operates under an assumption that you've already played those, so it's huge spoilers for those if you can't, afford those, but for some reason you can afford the subscription. It's a weird business model.
Yeah, well, a lot of stuff about the Old Republic's been weird from the very start, starting with the entire business model.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Alright, so story gameplay quality wise, what's it like?
Well, story wise, it starts off okay. I mean, well, reasonably alright considering it's the Old Republic, but they got a completely new writing team in for the expansion, which kind of retconned a lot of the bad things away, but
example?
Opened up actually trying to think about it now. They basically changed the entire motivation for the villain. The villain's no longer the intimidating eldritch abomination that somehow became your typical moustache twirling villain near the end, and becomes sort of like I want to say he's like their equivalent of Kreia, but he's not really.
Is he somebody trying to write Kreia and failing?
Not even. I think they're just trying to make something different and out there. By and large, it kind of works for what they're going for, but I just got a kind of feeling out of it.
Fair enough. Continue.
Now, the story picks up from, spoilers by the way, the Shadows of Revan expansion, where you, as the Outlander, which is one of the 8 player characters, starts with a small alliance of Republic and Sith Empire vessels chasing down the Sith Emperor, Vitiate, after he consumed all life on Ziost, and you happen to run into a probe that matches the description of certain technology that attacked both Tython and Korriban and decimated both the Jedi and Sith Academies.
Mm-hmm.
This happens to belong to the Eternal Empire of Zakul in wild space.
I can't believe that's the name they went with.
That's the name they went with.
He sounds like the bad guy from Ghostbusters, seriously. What's his name?
No,
Fool. There is no Sith Emperor, there is only Zakul.
You're going to love this because a lot of the naming convention seems to have been lifted straight from a Flash Gordon movie. I mean, you've got Zildrog and Isaacs. Like, these are all kind of gods that the Zakulans worship.
Oh,
and Vitiate has propped himself up as their emperor called Valkorion, who is some old guy with a beard that came out of nowhere. Valkorion, they got a different voice actor in to do the Sith Emperor other than Doug Bradley, who, by the way, is awesome. I don't remember the guy's name, but it has this really slow, drawl voice to him. It sounds like he's generally uninterested. And to be fair, if you put a bit more emotion into it, I could probably buy it as being this intimidating, all-powerful main villain. But getting back to the story, as it turns out, the long absences of the Sith Emperor across the centuries of the Sith Empire was because he was secretly building another empire in wild space.
As opposed to building an empire in the Outer Rim.
Yep. But he did not start from scratch this time. He found a massive, massive automated droid fleet in wild space.
As one does.
As one does. There have been many, there have been many theories about this because this massive fleet is called the Eternal Fleet. Of course, same naming convention. Mm-hmm. And apparently a long, long time ago in a battle far, far away, this fleet was attacked by another automated droid ship that looks strangely asymmetrical as opposed to them being completely symmetrical. And some people have taken that to mean that these ships belong to, respectively, the Silentium and the Abominor, which, as you remember, is where Vufi Ra comes from.
That's what I remember. I know the backstory on these because I have nothing better to do than read obscure Wikipedia pages. For those of us who don't do that and actually do productive things with their time, fill us in.
The Vufi Ra comes from a race of machines that were once built by an alien race, presumably from the Yuzhang Vong's original galaxy. They went to war with another race of machines which were all about asymmetry and debauchery and stuff like that. They decimated the Yuzhang Vong's home galaxy and then came to, well, our quote-unquote galaxy. And there they stayed.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the first reference they've made to the Yuzhang Vong. There's the conversation with Canderous in the first Knights of the Old Republic where he basically talks about a Yuzhang Vong scout that they encountered.
Oh yeah, I remember that. Weirdly enough, there's no references to the Yuzhang Vong in SWTOR.
I have no problems with that.
Which is good, it keeps it separate.
Yeah. Plus, it kind of still opens the possibility that they can eventually say, okay, SWTOR is canon, and therefore Knights of the Old Republic is canon. Can't really do that.
That would be great.
If stuff happens with the Vong. They should stay where they belong.
Yeah. Now, the story continuing on, Darth Marr's ship is attacked by the Eternal Empire, who are encroaching upon Zakulan space. his ship is shot down, and Darth Maul and the Outlander player character is captured. Now, for the sake of me referring to them as the Outlander, it's just a general catch-all term. It can be pretty much anyone. Now, you're brought before Emperor Valkorion and his ridiculous empire with all these children. He has children, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
And not
the guy gets lonely after 300 years.
Well, it's established
was a very unfortunate implication. I do apologize.
It's established in the vanilla KOTOR game that there are children of the Emperor. They are not literal offspring of his, but they are people chosen to host part of the Sith Emperor's essence. This is completely different. These are his biological children.
So those are the ones that we saw in the E3 trailer, the ones that are like fighting across the galaxy and then turn on each other at the end?
Yep, Thexan and Arkan. He also has a daughter called Valen.
I have no comment. Good for him.
Yeah.
I'm glad he was able to find a woman eventually, despite, the whole, oh, that's time, but we're going to keep talking about this because we actually have no other fodder to talk about. Please continue.
Okay, so the Outlander is captured, and the Sith Emperor offers to share all of his power with both the Outlander and Darth Maul if they kneel. Darth Maul, being the staunch imperialist that he is, picks up a lightsaber, proceeds to murder a ton of Zakulan knights, and turns on the Emperor, only to be cutscene powered to death.
Mm.
Now, this is a man, Darth Maul is supposedly second only to the Emperor in terms of raw power.
And I mean, just from a narrative standpoint, from what I know of the Old Republic, don't you, beat up the Emperor, at the very least in the Jedi Knight storyline? And
you do.
Actually kill him?
You kill the voice of the Emperor, yes, which considerably weakens his essence. And then you face him again, regardless of your player class. The voice of the Emperor is the physical host for the Emperor's spirit.
Right.
And you face him again, and from a narrative perspective, barely months later on Ziost in a severely weakened state with any player character, and you proceed to beat him down again.
Very good. He deserves it.
But he proceeds to consume every living thing on the planet Ziost after that, except for you.
Yeah, I have no idea how I'm going to work that into the thread that is going on in Ziost right now. You think that sort of thing would have come up at some point, but oh well.
Well, obviously it's not every living thing because there are still these weird monolith creatures. There's plant life and bird life still going on. So I think they define it by consuming all life as if they consume all force sensitive life because that's what he needs to sustain himself.
That's fair, I suppose, but isn't technically all life force sensitive to some extent?
That's true.
I mean, if a whole bunch of bugs can together channel the force, then... Well, I guess it's not written. No, that's a whole other debate that's just going to distract. Please continue.
Well, after the Outlander is captured and Darth Maul is killed, you receive two choices. One, you can be freed by Arkan and attack the Emperor, and therefore kneel to the Emperor. Refuse, and then Arkan kills the Emperor. Either way, the Emperor puts his essence into you and lets his body expire. Arkan then takes the Eternal Throne for himself and has you frozen in carbonite for 5 years. After this, you're woken up by Lana Beniko, who is a Sith Lord from the Shadow of Revan expansion. She frees you, and you basically romp around Zakuul for the better part of Chapter 1 trying to escape. And there you meet, what's his name? He's really forgettable. Koth? Yeah, Koth. He's a Zakuul pilot, and he takes you away with his droid, HK-55.
Good God, how many of these are we going to get?
I know.
300 years later, come on guys, innovate.
I wish they'd kept HK-51, I really do. At least just given him an upgrade or something.
I mean, he was meant to be the ultra prototype model in the cut ending of KOTOR too, so it would have made sense.
Yeah. The story behind the HK-51s is they were lost for 300 years. And suddenly turned up on Belsavis for some reason.
And
anyway.
All that time nobody decided, hey, these droids were really good, so let's develop past them.
Well, they did eventually with the HK-55, but he was a one-off model.
Oof. Go on.
Then you manage to escape Zakul, and you start forming the basis of an alliance. You crash land in the swamps of Zakul and happen upon a ship called the Gravestone, which is, from the theory point of view, the Abominor ship, which is a super weapon. It's kind of shaped like a weird mismatched epitaph, but basically they capture it and then they flee Zakul, form an alliance, and start fighting the Eternal Empire.
So they're rebels fighting against the Empire.
Pretty much. But the Republic and the Sith Empire are still standing.
I thought they got wrecked in the trailer.
They do, but they are forced to sign a treaty that means they can't expand their arms or their naval forces beyond a certain point. So what they do is they lend silent support to the Alliance.
This is just The Force Awakens, man.
Yep.
But
it's slightly
about this.
It's slightly better than The Force Awakens
because
you actually do things that are original. You about in the midway part of it, it takes you to the jungles of this planet called Odesson, where the Alliance has formed a base, and the Sith Emperor basically gives you a few trials, and eventually you come upon Satele Shan and the ghost of Darth Maul.
Marred by the experience 5 years ago, I'm sure. I'm sorry, it's late. I do apologize.
And they get into a kind of a philosophical debate about the Force, about how it's not really all dark and light, and that it has a will, but it requires someone to command that will. Hint, hint, hint. Mm-hmm. I think that's a kind of decent parallel with what we have on the site, like the Dark Lord is the highest manifestation of the Force as well.
Yeah, except all of our stuff is just made up.
Pretty much.
Anyway, how does it shape up compared to the vanilla game? Gameplay and writing-wise?
Better. A lot better than the vanilla game, because the vanilla game was marred by EA's intervention. See what I did there?
Yeah, I don't know if you could hear me snorting, but I snorted.
It does start off okay, but it falls very flat in the later chapters. I mean, it seems like there's a lack of effort and just like a rush to get deadlines met. And in the most recent chapter, one of the droids from the vanilla game secretly takes command of the Eternal Fleet and goes all Halo 5 on us.
So they're stealing from IG-88 this time.
Yep.
In case anyone's not sure, there is... No, I want to continue recording. There is a short story in one of the Tales books where apparently IG-88 somehow manages to upload himself into the Death Star. So whenever you see the Death Star firing, that's actually IG-88 firing the Death Star. And there's also hints that he just starts randomly opening and closing doors near Palpatine to screw with him. Because the Bantam era was kind of fucking weird. I mean, it gave us Darksaber and Callista, but I guess the Del Rey era isn't much better since it gave us Legacy and Abeloth, so Star Wars is just kind of weird and badly written at times.
It is. This is not really much of an exception, because it does start off okay, and as it goes on, it establishes a decent premise about the Force, about having an alliance. It kind of parallels the original trilogy, but not in a way that overtly rips it off like The Force Awakens. It keeps it kind of original, but it falls completely flat at the end.
So,
well, the
example of the ending falling flat, for instance?
Well, the droid in question is called Scorpio, and she is a hundreds-year-old droid that was apparently built by the same kind of people that built the Eternal Fleet, but she's the original, and she gets megalomania desires and takes it over and decides to rule the galaxy, blah, blah, blah. You've heard this all before. And apparently this is just the end of Season 1 to Knights of the Fallen Empire.
That's pretty ambitious.
There will be they say that they're going to make it multi-seasons, but I think they're just going to have it run for as long as it's profitable.
Don't you love it when they come out with a movie and they explicitly put part 1 in the title or the beginning. It's just kind of like, geez guys, you're really confident, aren't you?
Yes.
Anyway,
I think the Nostalgia Critic referenced that when he was doing a review of Pokemon, the first movie, says how arrogant you need to be the first movie.
Well, to be fair, when it's a juggernaut like Pokemon, or I think the Avengers films with the Infinity War series is supposed to be part 1 and 2 in the title, they've got the backing behind it that you can reasonably expect that would happen. But for most other movies, and considering that tour hasn't exactly been smooth sailing.
Well, they have done a thing recently. They've made the light versus dark event where you can win some fantastic things in game if you make dark or light side choices. But here's the stupid thing. The rewards you get are server dependent. So if the entire server goes dark side and you want light side ones, too bad.
Yeah, that's dumb.
Very.
Anyway, that's around 20 to 25 minutes of me trying to be funny, so we should probably move on to our next subject, and this is the part of the call where we shamefacedly admit that we don't really have one, and we're just kind of hoping that we think of something related to the site to talk about. That's quite an interesting image. Looks like something the artist would have say. Did you just get a weird feeling that we were flung a fortnight into the future because the podcast went off the rails last time and we're trying to tie what usable stuff we had last time into this second attempt?
Great Scott!
Anyway, so I hear that Tor just had a new expansion announced.
It did indeed. Knights of the Eternal Throne.
So where's this one pick up? To pick
This
up from
one
our
picks-
previous discussion.
Yeah, this one picks up exactly from where we last left off, which is at the very end of Knights of the Fallen Empire.
Spoiler warning,
Now,
I assume.
Yes, spoiler warning. They said there was going to be a second season / second year, if you will, like a comic book year of Knights of the Fallen Empire. However, I think it's just going to pick up immediately where they left off and carry over to the Eternal Throne, because in the last chapter, the assassin droid Scorpio seizes command of the Eternal Fleet, which, as I discussed previously, may or not belong to the Silentium.
That's right. I recall. This did happen just a couple of minutes ago. After all, mate, you don't need to remind me.
Oh, of course. Now, I think what's going to happen is that the Loyalist forces, and by Loyalist I mean the ships that are under Arkan's direct control, are going to either have to team up with the Alliance forces, or it's going to be a three-way, free-for-all, as I've done twice in the past. First, they did it with the Hutt Cartel in the Rise of the Hutt Cartel expansion. Then they did it again with the Revenites in the Shadows of Revan expansion, so kind of sensing a theme going on here.
Yeah. Still, at least it's better than the alternative, which I guess would have been she just takes control of the fleet and shuts it all down. That's just kind of a tired, hackneyed old plot device, honestly, where they just have to do the one thing that solves everything as opposed to the protracted conflict, which this is Star Wars The Old Republic. It's got much more room to work with than your average RPG, so they can get around with it.
This is very true. I mean, what I was expecting was something different, because they make it seem like Scorpio is being destroyed in that, but it's a ruse in order for her to seize command of the Eternal Fleet. But it's really uncertain what she's going to do with it. I mean, it could pull a Halo 5 and it's, organics must be dominated, blah, 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 blah. But Scorpio doesn't really strike me as the kind of all organics must die. She's more of the, let's poke the bear and see what it does, rather than let's cage the bear and put giant lasers over its head.
Maybe what they should do is they should get them to take the Eternal Fleet, put it way outside the galaxy, and it can just blow up the entire Yuuzhan Vong, and they can start a whole new Legends canon where everything after Survivor's Quest never happened because the Eternal Fleet blew up the Yuuzhan Vong invasion fleet. Of course, that means that our timeline couldn't really work, but, you win some, you lose some.
Well, going back to the Gravestone ship, it possesses a super weapon capable of a chain effect, which is called the Omni Cannon. You target one ship, it has like a sort of...
Did they get that from Ben 10?
I hope not. Yeah, basically one shot equals many, many kills. It's kind of based on the Silencer super weapon from the vanilla game, but different kind of practice. The Silencer is more of a radiation bloom than a chain effect, so they are reusing assets, but in a different way. It's not bad, but could be more original.
Mm. Well, they've only got so much budget after they blow all of them on the reveal trailers.
That's true. Surprisingly, they use did I mention this before, that they actually use the 3D models provided by Blur Studios for the trailers, but lower res for the game, which is why they kind of look more sort of Uncanny Valley compared to the rest of the game models.
I had noticed that actually.
I mean, your player character doesn't have an updated model or upgraded textures. It's just like a vanilla model with the upgraded ones. It's really jarring to look at.
Yeah, Tor is very basic. Honestly, I think Knights of the Old Republic 2 looked better than it. And arguably Knights of the Old Republic 1, but really only because it had such crap anti-aliasing.
It's chunky, I'll say that much. Everything is really, really chunky and blocky in this game.
So then, any predictions as to what you think is going to happen in this expansion? Maybe we can reconvene in like a year's time or a year and a half's time, like with the previous podcast, so that we can discuss what has happened since then. Great
idea. My prediction is that Scorpio is just going to do a regular trolley thing. I mean, she's insistent on self-evolution. That's her sole thing. She's not really interested in war or politics, just self-evolution, really. So what I think is going to happen is the Outlander is going to turn the gravestone on what's left of the Eternal Fleet and seize command of the Eternal Throne proper and just blow up the whole Eternal Fleet because it's too dangerous to be left in the wrong hands, blah, blah, blah. Everything goes back to normal.
Boy, you've really got to love that Republic Dark Age for letting people write whatever they want and just say, oh, they lost all records of it, eh? You think a giant robot army that destroyed the Republic and the Sith Empire, which had never been mentioned before, would have come up?
You know, I like that they've kind of kept it mostly to wild space, but the fact that it comes into Galactic Core is... Well, you can't really hide that, can you?
Plus, Caravan got wrecked. Like,
it did.
Watch the Fallen Empire trailer. It gets absolutely wrecked. All the statues start falling down, man, and yet they're still... Actually, no, they're not really there in Jedi Academy, but that doesn't really count because Jedi Academy doesn't look remotely like the...
You're gonna love this.
Anyway.
You're gonna love this. Because the studio couldn't afford to make two different sets of locales, like pre and after, they basically said, they rebuilt.
Oh.
Ruins exactly the way they were, with broken and all.
I'm not really surprised, to be perfectly honest with you.
It's a complete cop-out, but I can see where they're coming from. The time it would take and the amount of money that it would take to make that. I mean, look how long it took them to make those two flashpoints. For those who don't know, there are two flashpoints called...
Sorry, what's a flashpoint?
A flashpoint is basically a group mission equivalent of a SWTOR. You have a 4-man group that does random things, usually invade a planet, kill a bunch of enemies, kill a couple of bosses. That's it.
So that's like, what's it called? I was watching a video. The one where you fight Malgus, is that Quest or Flashpoint?
That's a flashpoint. It's called the False Emperor.
Okay, so the flashpoints can be story related as well.
Yes.
Cool. Continue, please.
You can also do them solo, which turns them into a tactical flashpoint, but that's neither here nor there. There are two flashpoints set on the Sith and Jedi Star Wars, Tython and Korriban, and they have changed, destroyed locales because they're invaded by Revanite forces from the opposite ends of the sides. They invade the planets, they get a little bit shot up, and that took quite a long time for them to make. I mean, considering they're reusing assets to make it broken, change the lighting, it took them quite a lot of time, and to have a completely redone one to match the trailer would take them even more time and money they just didn't have, despite the fact that they're selling cartel packs left, right, and centre.
That's fair, I suppose. And besides, I'd much rather they had money for those awesome CGI trailers anyway. I can experience that without having to pay for it.
Yeah. Well, hey, the game's free to play.
And I have had a copy sitting in my bookshelf that a friend bought me like 4 years ago. 5 years ago. 4? 5? 4 or 5 years ago that I have sworn never to play for some reason, so you never know, it wouldn't be on my dime. Just, here's a thought, just while I'm on the subject. Tython. Lost again, yeah? Like, everyone forgot about it again.
That's actually a good point. It never comes up. It never really comes up. I mean, it's implied that a lot of Jedi stayed on Coruscant and rebuilt, but a lot, including the High Council, went to Tython.
Yeah, because from what I remember of Jedi history, it's like they're there 25,000 years before the films, and then eventually they just all sort of leave it, and they forget about it completely because I don't remember what I did last night. I certainly couldn't remember what I did 25,000 years ago. But now they found it again, and the Jedi have forgotten about it completely in the quote-unquote modern era, if I'm not mistaken. So somehow they've lost it again.
Well, according to the timelines which were released before the game came out, the Jedi did know that Tython was there. They didn't forget about it. It was called their ancestral home, and they returned to their roots, so they didn't really forget about it.
Fair enough.
In 20,000 years, but that still doesn't explain how they didn't forget about it in 20,000 years. Why all of a sudden did they forget about it in 4,000?
Yeah, well, 4,000 years is a long time. I don't remember what I did this morning, much less last night, mate.
That's true.
Still, though, could be fodder for a mission, trying to track down Tython again.
Yeah, it could be.
Little running plot thread.
Yeah, I mean, the locales in the game, it's actually a much, much bigger planet than Korriban. Korriban is one of the smallest planets in the game.
Well, it was the smallest planet, more or less, in Knights of the Old Republic 1 and 2 as well. It was bigger in Jedi Academy, of all things.
Yeah, well, actually, Drummond Cass is a lot smaller than Coruscant, to be fair, but it's Coruscant. What do you want from it? I mean,
well, you could run across a bridge to like a cafe, and then run across a bridge to a building, and then run down a bridge to another building. And maybe if you run far enough, you, I don't know, get to the Senate or something, because there's about 2 recognizable points of interest on that planet.
Yeah, the Senate's quite more like a hub type thing, but it's kind of wishy-washy. I mean, things are really close to each other. I know why they did that, but it would have been better rather to have it fade to black, so give you the illusion that you're traveling further than they actually are.
Yeah. Or you could have just done the Knights of the Old Republic transitions where you run to a thinly defined boundary and you can see it off in the distance, and then off you go.
Yeah, they don't tend to use much of skyboxes for that. They have kind of more matte painting type things in the background that give the illusion of 3D.
Fair enough.
So I'm trying to think, what's the biggest planet? It's either Hoth or Tatooine. It's one of the two.
Gee, the 2 planets where there is nothing of interest for hundreds of kilometers around.
Well, and Tor, Hoth kind of becomes like a starship graveyard. Like, the Republic had a secret project there, and it crash landed in the planet because the Sith Empire found about it and decided, oh, this is a very big ship that we should probably shoot the shit off rather than capture.
And then everybody forgot about Hoth again until Empire Strikes Back. That's one of the problems with keeping on coming back to the familiar locales from the films. Half the time they were meant to be these abandoned, ignored places that nobody really knew about, and that's why the Rebel Alliance or whatever secretive organization we were focusing on at the time used them. But then you just go back a couple of thousand years and suddenly, oh, there was massive battles fought there.
That's true. I think they're trying to compare it to like real world things about how certain cultures would interact with other cultures, and nobody else in the rest of the world would know about this until hundreds and hundreds of years later.
That's true, I suppose. So, any closing remarks about the Old Republic before we move on?
Still mediocre at best. We'll see what Knights of the Eternal Throne brings up, but I don't have huge high hopes for it. I mean, I was kind of pleasantly surprised in a few places by it, but nothing to really write home about. But we'll see what it does.
That feel when no KOTOR 3, ever.
You know, if they'd made the Old Republic a single-player game, just focus on single-player stuff rather than making it an MMORPG, it could have been KOTOR 3. Could have been.
Well, that's a road that sadly none of us will ever get to walk.
Yeah, unfortunately.
So, on to more recent news, and as I'm sure all of you must have heard by now, not only has the trailer for Star Wars Rebels Season 3 been released, but the rumours were true, and we get the single greatest villain in Star Wars history outside of the films as the main villain of the next season.
Throne hype!
Hype! I got home at 1:30, 2 o'clock that night, and I could barely sleep because I was so hype about Thrawn. God, I can't actually believe they went through with it. Although, I have to admit, I'm a little bit worried that he's going to get the Malachor treatment.
Yeah, that's kind of a big risk when it comes to Disney, but hopefully there'll be some Dave Filoni intervention, because I know he's wanted to use him forever and ever and ever. He did mention that he wanted to use him in the Clone Wars early on, but couldn't, so we'll see what he does in Rebels.
So, to clue those of you who aren't quite sure into what I mean by another Malachor, in Season 2 of Star Wars Rebels, the titular rebel group were told by the spirit of Yoda, or the projection, since he wasn't dead at that point, of Yoda to go to a planet called Malachor. And in the original Legends canon, Malachor is a planet mentioned in Knights of the Old Republic 1 and very prominent in Knights of the Old Republic 2, where 4,000 years before the films, the final battle of the Mandalorian Wars went down, and this is all in the backstory of Knights of the Old Republic and Star Wars The Old Republic. And you get to go there in Knights of the Old Republic 2 and see what happened there. There's a whole Sith Academy that's been hidden away there. It's where basically the greatest atrocity before Alderaan went down. It's where literal wounds in the Force were created. It was a very, very terrible thing. So we're all really excited for, holy crap, they're going to recanonize Malachor. We might get all of the Knights of the Old Republic games canon again. Then when we got there, basically all that was the same was there was a Sith temple there, and it was named Malachor. So, I know a lot of other people didn't mind, but personally I felt a bit, robbed because they mentioned Malachor, and I'm thinking, holy shit, what next? But then they basically just have the name. So, my concern is we're going to get Thrawn, but he's just going to be called Thrawn, and he's going to be a blue dude with red eyes. He's not actually going to be Thrawn we know and love, who is the complete tactical badass who can completely psychoanalyze an entire species just by looking at an art gallery.
Well, I hope that they'll play to that from what we've seen in the trailer. Hopefully.
I am actually reasonably hopeful, though, because at the same time, Star Wars Thrawn was announced, which is a prequel book written by Timothy Zahn. Now, for those of you who don't know, when Thrawn was first introduced, it was in the Thrawn trilogy, Heir to the Empire, Dark Force Rising, and The Last Command, written by Timothy Zahn in the early 90s, and essentially it was what kicked off the modern Star Wars expanded universe as we knew it, and basically the interpretation of the universe that he created was all we had between about 1991 and 1998, I think. Or was it 1999? Shit, I should know this. It was 1999 when The Phantom Menace came out?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I knew that. I obviously knew that. So he was very influential during that period, and basically up until the entire Legends continuity was scrapped, we were all basically playing around in his universe. Everything after the films was very heavily influenced by all the stuff that he had done, and even in the post-Yuuzhan Vong galaxy, which he wasn't involved in at all, lots of his characters, lots of organizations that he put forward, things that happened in his book still had major ramifications all the way down the line. So if anybody's going to give Thrawn a good treatment, it's going to be the guy who first created him. More to the point, if he's getting to write a prequel novel, I'm kind of hoping that he's going to be able to consult with the Rebels team and say, guys, Thrawn's not stupid. He wouldn't just stand in the middle of a room with two lightsaber-wielding Jedi with absolutely nothing to protect himself. Which, he probably absolutely would do if somebody didn't say no, because the villains in that show, I love it, but they've done some really stupid things.
Yeah, they're not very threatening as far as villains go.
They're going to have to walk a pretty delicate balance though, because if they don't write Thrawn as well as Zahn did, there's this perception that Thrawn was completely unstoppable, which I believe I actually said about 30 seconds ago, which is mostly true, but he wasn't invincible. Like, there were things that he missed and little advantages and things that he overlooked that people tend to overlook, and those eventually all built up into what killed him. So, he can be beaten, but if they take the he's an unstoppable route, nothing can ever get past him, then there's pretty much no way the rebels can win. So unless they write it all pretty darn well, we're probably either going to end up with one of two things. Thrawn is going to look incompetent and the rebels constantly win or escape, or the rebels are never going to win because Thrawn is too badass for them. Or option 3, we could end up with a bit of a Vader situation where they barely escape with their lives, but that'll probably end up having the same, he's obviously not that threatening that all the rest of the villains have at the moment because they just kept escaping them at the last minute.
Yeah, that's been very, very prominent throughout the series. It's possible that Thrawn will be relegated to some backward system. The Emperor will get displeased with him saying, you failed to stop him too, go away, I'll bring in someone else. Try something new.
But who else is there to bring in? Like, they've chopped through a very large portion of the Inquisitors at this point. They can't bring in Vader again, obviously, because they've already shown Vader just absolutely destroys them every single time. They have already brought in Tarkin and had Tarkin lose, so I suppose they could bring him in again, but he's already lost a bit of his threat. So what's left? They're probably going to have to find more original villains, but they're in a very difficult situation where, because they have such a small cast with so little resources, they have to either keep winning and make the bad guys look bad, or they have to just keep scraping by, and you just sort of think, it doesn't matter what they do because the Empire's just going to come along and destroy it anyway, and there's not going to be much of a sense of accomplishment.
Yeah, they've kind of got themselves in a bit of a precarious situation. Especially when it comes to a character like Thrawn. I mean, a lot of people would argue that they owe their Star Wars fandom to Thrawn and Timothy Zahn. As a matter of fact, there was a guy on YouTube named Right4 that says, as far as the films go, they're quaint in relation to the larger Star Wars lore, and that the expanded universe, as started by Zahn, is what got a lot of people into Star Wars rather than the movies themselves.
That's probably true in a literal sense, in that a lot is a lot of people, and you can just say a lot without really to care about relative terms, but come on. As popular as the books were, and they were very, very, very popular, millions upon millions upon millions of people saw the films, fell in love with the films, have never watched anything more than the films, or have maybe just read one or two of the books here and there. They're in love with the films, not with the books.
Oh, yeah.
Apparently, incidentally, the novelization for The Force Awakens clears up a lot of some of the dumber plot moments and some of the characters acting like total dunces, but that's neither here nor there.
Yeah. It's that argument of X is better than Y, so.
On some more positive news as well, everyone's favourite rebel pilot, Wedge Antilles, is joining the cast.
I have to wonder though, are they getting Dennis Lawson?
From the sounds of it, they've just got generic rebel pilot voicing him. But they've got Lars Mikkelsen, I think, voicing Thrawn, so they've got a big name in there somewhere.
Yeah.
Plus, if Vader turns up again, we'll probably get some more James L. Jones. And I'm hearing as well that Vader will be in Rogue One and that he will be voiced by James L. Jones.
Yeah, I've heard that.
And hopefully played by David Prowse.
Is David Prowse is still alive. Why did I think David Prowse was dead?
Well, it has been a long time since those movies came out. I was about to ask if he was still alive.
He is very, very old as far as I'm aware. I think he can't walk unassisted though.
Oh, poor guy. He just deserves to get a bit more recognition for playing Vader, but
He does. I think he was a bit miffed that he didn't get quite as much, but it's really been sort of James Earl Jones's thing.
Yeah, well, he did have an imposing physical presence, but to be fair, it was his voice that really defined the character.
You surely must have seen the behind the scenes of the original trilogy where they have David Prowse's voice. Like before, they dubbed James Earl Jones over it, whereas on the Tantive 4.
I have indeed, actually. I can probably, if somebody reminds me, pop a link to that video in the description if anybody's interested. You can tell it's a placeholder, let's put it at that.
It's very highly amusing.
Have you seen the one where they dub in older Vader with all of Jake Lloyd's voice lines?
No, I haven't.
You will have to watch that after the video because it's pretty fantastic. I can probably link to that one too if anyone's interested enough to remind me.
Oh God.
It turns out there is a right way to say, "Are you an angel?"
Really?
Mm-hmm. It just has to be seen to be believed.
Okay, I'll take your word for it.
So, on to more relevant matters. Since we're getting a few more canon characters, I'm really hoping they bring back some of the more classic rogues. Like, they probably won't bring back Taicho, or how do you pronounce Taicho or Taiko?
I think it's Taiko. I'm pretty sure because when I played Rebel Strike, they called him Taiko.
They probably won't bring back Taiko, although he might have had a mention in one of the official novels somewhere. And Jansen and Hobby are both technically canon characters because they have brief roles in, I think, Empire Strikes Back, or they're mentioned in Empire Strikes Back. But I, for one, am really hoping that they bring back Corran Horn. Oh yeah, you've got to bring back Corran Horn. If at the very least, I want them to bring back his Corellian jokes. How many Corellians does it take to change a light bulb?
Gee, I don't know. How many does it take?
None. If the lights are off, you can't see them cheating at Pazak. I strongly recommend everyone read I, Jedi. It was a great novel, and it had a full 4 Corellian jokes in it.
Isn't that the one with the Gentari?
Yes, actually. They make good antagonists since they're not technically villains. But it's more worth it just for first person. I think it's the only book in the entire expanded universe that was written in first person perspective, and it's very well written. Corran goes through a lot of character development. There's some really awesome moments, and they basically make the Jedi Academy trilogy bearable. As for anybody who's not quite aware, Jedi Academy trilogy, which was originally written by Kevin J. Anderson. Oh, sorry, something stuck in my throat there. It was Luke setting up his first academy, and it was basically the first thing we got after the Thrawn trilogy, so everybody jumped on it, even though it wasn't really that good because everyone was desperate for more. So lots of plot holes, lots of really stupid and questionable decisions. So come 4-5 years later, I, Jedi comes out and is technically a sequel to the X-Wing series since Corran was first introduced in the X-Wing series. And it basically does a fantastic job of explaining why everyone was a total idiot, or alternatively, calling out the people who were total idiots and made really questionable decisions. For example, a person who possessed by an ancient, more influenced by an ancient dark side spirit, Exar Kun, blows up a planet with 30 million people on it. Nothing happens to him. Doesn't even get arrested or anything. Basically, everyone's fine with that in Jedi Academy, but come on, Jedi, everyone's actually really pissed off about it, as any reasonable person would be.
Well, that's Kip Duran for you.
Yeah, but anyway, if you see it in your library, guys, pick it up. It's worth a read, in my opinion. Even if you haven't read the previous books.
Now, there's also a few other old Legends characters that may or may not be coming back into canon. As far as I'm aware, the name Jan Ors has been dropped as it relates to Rogue One.
That would be great. I would really like to see Jan again, especially if we get to see Kal-Katarn again.
Definitely heard mentioned that Jan is going to be in it as possibly a minor character, maybe a freighter pilot or something. But where there's Jan, there's always got to be Kal-Katarn.
I honestly would be surprised if they brought the two of them back, considering Kanan and Hera are more or less the reborn versions of them. I mean, Hera is voiced by the same person who voiced Jan back in Jedi Outcast, after all, and Kanan's got a very similar design and is generally a fairly similar character to what Kyle was.
That's true, but he's kind of a poor man's Kyle. I mean, he's voiced by Freddie Prinze Jr. Come on.
Well, to be fair to Freddie Prinze Jr., he actually voices the character fairly well.
He does, but I'm not a huge fan of Freddie Prinze myself.
As far as I remember, Freddie Prinze Jr. voiced Fred in the Scooby-Doo movies, didn't he?
I think so. I think so.
Did he actually do anything more career-worthy? He's married to Buffy, isn't he?
Him? No, no. There's another guy. There's another guy that's married to hang on, I'm trying to think here. No, different actress. Thinking of a different actress. Sorry. He is married to Sarah Michelle Gellar.
Who voiced a character in Rebels that was killed off within a season. Great use of talent.
Yep. He also played, what the hell's his name? He's that guy in Mass Effect 3.
Commander Shepard?
No, the meathead, the other one, the guy that just is on Normandy for some reason.
Well, the only one I can think of is the reporter.
Is it James Vega. James Vega, that's it.
Right, him. Sorry, I'd completely forgotten about him. Probably because he's the most forgettable character in any BioWare game ever.
Yep.
So, I think that about wraps up that subject, unless anything else to talk about with Rebels. We could talk reasonably about Season 2, actually.
We could, considering that there's been a lot of things happening as it relates to a couple of characters in TCW/Rebels, because Dave Filoni had a few panels at the Star Wars Celebration in London.
Continue.
He brought Ashley Eckstein, who voices Ahsoka Tano, on stage and showed the audience something that they called Dave's Doodles.
Spoiler warning for anybody who hasn't seen the Clone Wars and or Star Wars Rebels yet, just with regards to what happens to Ahsoka.
Huge spoiler warnings. He had a bunch of sketches that was supposed to appear in the cancelled Season 7 where Ahsoka would have her own sort of mini arc where she dealt with the consequences of leaving the Jedi and basically trying to turn into a functioning member of society.
It's kind of a shame that they've had to wrap up a lot of those plot arcs as comic books. I mean, nothing against comic books, but to go from major show now on basically every Netflix across the world and easily accessible online to now you need to go and buy a comic to see what happened with this plot thread. It's a bit of a step down. It would have been nice if they could have at least just finished the Clone Wars.
Dave did say that a lot of these plot threads are going to be brought up in a future Ahsoka Tano novel.
Yeah, I think it's Fulcrum's Lost Tales, they've called it.
Yeah,
there's name. The new EU is so bad at naming things, man.
They are.
I mean, everything since probably the Unifying Force came out has been a crap name, more or less. Like, most things. The Old Republic, Crucible, Bloodlines, Aftermath. Oh gee, I wonder what it could be about. No bloody Heir to the Empire or The Last Command. But that's my own personal war to wage. Continue.
Well, anyway, it continues from where Ahsoka's journey left off, leaving the Jedi. They brought back a lot of cancelled stuff, like Ahsoka actually goes to level 1313 or 1313 from the cancelled game, where she meets up with this smuggler that sort of serves as a poor man's, was his name Lux, that sort of a guy that she kind of got with but didn't really get with?
Yeah, that was Lux.
Yeah, him.
God, they had some bad names in that show. Flora,
yeah.
Lux Bonteri.
She has a kind of fling with this smuggler guy and gets into this sort of criminal underworld, and that's how she eventually ends up with the Alliance. But Dave Filoni was showing a bunch of sketches where something happens, like a dark side threat emerges on Coruscant that threatens the Jedi, and as it turns out...
Could it be Emperor Palpatine?
Yes, as a matter of fact it is.
Gee, how could I have ever guessed that?
Well, as it turns out, the Jedi, in this new canon perspective, did a something quite similar to what they used to do in pagan sites, is that they would build secular churches on top of it. And, as it turns out, the Jedi built their temple above an ancient Sith temple.
That's actually not not entirely new thing.
No, it was on top of a dark-sided Force nexus.
I think you get to go there in some of the expansions to the Force Unleashed, and it comes up a couple of times in the expanded universe. They built it on a mountain, and the top of the mountain is like a dark side nexus.
Yeah, except in this, it goes onto the very, very bottom of a Coruscant to the planet's surface, like underneath all the layers of city and stuff like that, and there's a Sith temple under there. They had these really weird sketches of gears and really weird red machinery churning in the background. And Ahsoka actually meets up with Anakin one last time, and at the very end of these arcs, they were going to get called away to Mandalore because there was an invasion happening and Darth Maul reappears, which is how Ahsoka would know Maul from Rebels, considering she never met him. And at the very end of it, Anakin leaves a small contingent of the 501st, led by Rex, to fight the Mandalorians, and they get called away. The Chancellor's been kidnapped, thus leading into Episode 3.
Yeah, I think I've read a couple of times that Filoni mentioned his original plan was like 9 or 10 seasons to culminate in the Battle of Mandalore and lead into Revenge of the Sith. From memory, actually, Ahsoka says in Rebels, the last time I saw Anakin, he was rushing off to save the Chancellor. So, it happened, we just never got to see it.
Yeah, it's supposedly going to be outlined in this book, but we'll have to wait and see. It was going to be really epic because there was a lot of stuff with the clones, and when Order 66 hits, obviously Rex doesn't want to do it because he tears out his chip as seen in Rebels. And
it's a
they're
Oh, sorry, you first.
Right, they find Ahsoka in this forest, and they say they're going to have to come with us, and she is meditating and says, my friends won't let you, and the trees turn out to be giant beasts that are kind of like plant, tree, wolf creatures, because Dave Filoni is obsessed with wolves.
Yes, he is, I've noticed that.
And then they attack the clone troopers and flee on them, and Rex and Ahsoka go their separate ways.
It's a shame we won't get to see any of that, especially the Battle of Mandalore, because they've been building up to it since season 2 of the show, and 6 seasons and a couple of reels from season 7 in, and they were actually getting really good with their scale by the end of it because they were getting more money. So
they were.
By the last couple of seasons, their battles actually looked to be fairly large. Even in season 4, a couple of the clones fly into a massive sky battle, and even though you don't really get to see the whole fight going on. It's like in Revenge of the Sith when Obi-Wan and Anakin fly through the Battle of Coruscant. You can see it's a big battle. There's a lot going on. We just don't focus on the whole battle. We focus on a couple of people in it. So it was basically the whole payoff to the show that they were building up to and were robbed off very quickly.
Yeah, you can thank Disney for that. But there is lots of petitions and there's huge interest to get these seasons made, and if Disney's smart and they want to make a lot of money, which I know they want to do, they will fund the latter seasons of the Clone Wars as well as Rebels, because those are 2 highly profitable series.
Disney probably won't do it.
They probably won't,
I'm
but
sure if they were going to do it, they wouldn't have axed the show in the first place, to be perfectly honest with you.
That's true, but...
And from memory, the Clone Wars was, admittedly Disney could finance it, but the Clone Wars was obscenely expensive, especially in the later seasons, and the main reason they were able to do what they wanted was because it was basically financed out of George's back pocket. Because, George basically has more money than God at this point. Well, he did until he gave most of it away.
Well, you never know. Disney is all about money, and hopefully if there's enough interest, they'll say, right, we can make quite a lot of money out of this, more than what we put into it.
That would require Disney to do anything other than care about the bottom line.
Yeah.
If it costs them $1 more to make the Clone Wars, then they would get in profit from, hang on, how am I trying to say this? If they make $1 less from making the Clone Wars than they would from Rebels. They won't continue with the Clone Wars, they're just going to stick with Rebels. Remember, these are the same guys who go to the US courts basically every couple of years so that they can fight to keep copyright laws from getting any shorter so they don't lose control of Mickey Mouse.
What a shame.
So we ended up talking for a little bit longer about Rebels, can't complain about that. Shall we
So it
move
was
on?
good to talk.
Yeah,
Yes, let's move on.
Well, I blathered on enough, you say some words now.
I have kind of run out of things to say. I was going to kind of talk about a revised version of Knights of the Fallen Empire, but I think I kind of beat that to death earlier. So, shall we talk about the Galaxy event you're running with the Sith Meditation Sphere on Ziost, or Zeos, however you want to call it?
We can if you want. It's gotten past the major point now. I obviously can't talk about what's going to happen next with all the... Well, actually, I guess I really can talk about what's going to happen next because you already wrote a story based on the consequences of what Lucifer and Strigus? It's Striga, so I think it's Strigus? Whatever. That guy, because I literally don't know how to pronounce any names in the English or Masasi language, what they're going to find next. I've completely lost my train of thought, but yeah, I can talk about that too.
Yes, let's. So, the Sith Meditation Sphere mentions that Lucifer and the New Sith Brotherhood are not worthy.
That's what he says. That's what he said, how long ago now? About 11 or 10 hours ago when I wrote it, yes.
So, is there a reason for that?
There is a reason, yes.
Are you willing to go into that reason?
If you ask the right questions, yes.
Okay, so why specifically is the New Sith Brotherhood unworthy of the ship's secrets in its mind as opposed to, say, I don't know, the one Sith who are around in our timeline right now?
Well, do you want the in-universe explanation or the actual explanation?
Whichever you're prepared to give.
Well, the actual explanation is I need him to bugger off to go find another group of Sith to introduce as antagonists God knows when.
Lovely.
I used them for my own nefarious purposes. I feel kind of guilty about the fact that it was always going to have that ending regardless of what people said or did, but I was actually really impressed with the quality of the roleplay that came out with Strigus.
This is getting to be this whole Zendor-Shendor argument again, isn't it?
Oh god, don't start that. I remember we asked about it, I can't remember who it was, but we asked in the chat box sometime, and I don't think Reva ever actually saw it. Reva, if you hear this, can you please, record on Vokaroo or something how your ship's name is actually pronounced? Because I've been wondering this for years. And we were like, hey, do you know how it's pronounced, Shendor or Zendor? And somebody else responded, well, I think it's either Shendor with an SH or Zendor with a Z. It's like, that's what we just said. God, how is it pronounced?
This is even more complicated than trying to pronounce Katak.
Katak? What?
The Sith language, Katak.
It has a name?
Yeah, there's Katrai and Katak.
Oh, that's right, because fanwankery and all that stuff.
Well, the Masasi language has a kind of semi-official name. It's called Balk, B-A-L-C.
I have to confess, I just balked at hearing that name.
Oh!
I'm sorry,
Please
you're saying.
Anyway, wait, where did we get off at? Yeah, Balk, the Masasi language, well, kind of the Masasi language. It's basically nonsense when it's translated literally back into Basic, which is why I had to come up with the idea of it being more about facial expressions and subtle movements and pheromones rather than spoken word.
That's fair.
An easy enough way to get around the fact that it's complete and utter nonsense whenever it's translated word for word back into English.
Well,
Basic.
I can't really judge. When Amarada and I looked at the Miralukan language, we basically just said, oh, body language, man. Waved our hands and we're done with it.
Yeah. If it's convenient enough, it works.
So, retracing our steps, we were talking about guide.
We were
because the meditation sphere that Strigus? I'm just going to say Strigus or Strigus, whichever I feel like from now on. And if it's wrong, then Strigus, if you're listening to this, you can just sort of smack your forehead every time and berate me later. Because the meditation sphere ship that Strigus encountered is in canon, and in canon it is encountered by Ben Skywalker about 4 or 5 years from now. I haven't read Legacy of the Force where he encounters it, so I basically had liberty to do whatever I want with it, and I chose to make it a bit more interesting, in my opinion, but that's because Legacy of the Force is crap. But the point that I'm trying to make is, in canon, he is given the incredibly, well, Exless, you would know, he is given an incredibly inventive and intuitive name, not only by Alima Ra, but then by a completely different set of people when they run into him. Would you like to tell the galaxy at large what this Sith meditation sphere vessel is called by two completely independent groups of people?
Ship.
No, the name, not the class of vehicle.
Ship.
I said name. What's it called?
They call it ship.
No.
Literally ship. Nothing else. They're not referring to the class of it. That is the name they give it.
Yes.
Ship. S-H-I-P.
Yes, ladies and gentlemen, what the finest minds of the end of the Legends era expanded universe were able to come up with was ship. Not some made-up word that means bringer of death. Not some made-up word that means destroyer of Jedi. Not harbinger or sovereign or anything remotely cool or appropriate. They call it ship. And
Of
because
all the
Strigus
names-
has half a brain, he gives it the much more appropriate name of Guide. Thank you, Strigus. And I mean that unironically, even though I just used the word unironically, which I'm pretty sure I'm not allowed to do. Fuck, what was I going to say? Oh, that's right, I was saying thank you, because you are now officially smarter than every single one of those hack authors, except for Aaron Alston, God rest him.
Now, this is a funny thing. Because it's a Sith meditation sphere and it has the name Guide, the name Guide, when translated into Katak, becomes Taiji.
Which is a little bit... I remember looking at that when it was written and thinking, that sounds a bit feminine, and Guide is masculine. He's not technically a guy, but he's got masculine programming.
That's true, but if this thing will cooperate with me, which is a translator device that I'm using, translating it into Kutrai, which is considered lower Sith, it becomes Vesti.
Well, considering he was made by the proper high echelons of Sith, he probably would be like, dude, no. I'm not having a name in Pig Latin.
Well, the engineer caste was sort of considered a lower caste. It was third in the pecking order, and they built literally everything for the Sith.
Yeah, but like, factory workers and labourers built everything during the Industrial Revolution, and yet the nobility didn't go, oh yes, I'm going to name my new royal son Barry.
Well, to be fair, there were less factory workers and more artisans and architects. They were the people that would build like the Parthenon of their days, and as opposed to building the cheap, disposable cars and shit like that.
Mate, shh, okay? Look, just stop correcting me, alright?
Okay, we'll roll with it.
If I wanted to be corrected, I would have invited correction. And did you hear me say you may correct me? No correcting. That's not what we do here.
Okay.
Now, what were we talking about originally? That's right. So, actual reason why he didn't find them worthy was because I needed him not to use him for other things. In-universe explanation is a bit more complicated. Shall I explain it?
Please do. If you can simplify it for the masses, go ahead.
Oh, well, the simplified for the masses version is that he didn't agree with the philosophy.
That's simple enough.
The more complicated version is, surprisingly, a bit more complicated. The thing to remember about Ship is that he's not really... He's basically an artificial intelligence on the level of maybe R2 or C-3PO, where he is artificial in origin, but he's more or less got emotions and thoughts and interpretations of his own. He is essentially a living person, just he didn't come from organic means. Well, actually, he very well could have come from organic means, because he's kind of... I tried to hint at it in canon, like he can basically grow stuff at will as he wants it. He's an organic machine, basically. It's never really made clear exactly how they made him or what was used to make him, but he's more than just a simple ship.
I have a theory on this, actually, about how he's able to make these things.
Do tell. I could use
Sith meditation spheres amplify force powers that have to do with mental manipulation, right?
Mm-hmm. I think so. I have no idea.
Well, that's how Nagasadao used his in the Battle of Koros Major. He used force illusions, and his Sith meditation sphere amplified it tenfold to the point where these people were literally being attacked by phantom things that were not there. They were taking real damage from things that were not there.
Oh, yeah, I suppose it could be something along the same lines.
That's what I'm kind of hinting at, is because, and I'm assuming here that Nagasadao's Sith meditation sphere was not sentient and or artificially intelligent, whereas Ship is, which leads me to believe that if Ship has some form of control over this amplification process, because in Nagasadao's one, there are like these crystalline structures. Now, whether these are force sensitive or not is up for debate, but in my headcanon, that's the amplification devices for the force powers. Therefore, if Ship has a similar sort of makeup and can access this, it can kind of make things seem real. It's like a placebo effect.
Yeah, actually, that could work. Like, the only things that he officially does, at least in our fanon, is he, like, makes a bed and he makes chairs. And that's about it. And all the other stuff, he doesn't have water or anything. He isn't able to make food, but he can obviously control the temperature because, you know, he is a starship. He has AC installed like any good starship. So he's never really doing anything that couldn't just be a really, really powerful force illusion.
It could be construed that considering that Strigus is an apprentice, that the level of control that Ship or Guide, whatever you want to call it, can exert over him is enough to make him...
Because Ship is a shit name. And
it
whoever
is
came
indeed.
up with it, I bet it was Karen Travis, should be shot. Even though I think it was actually Aaron Alston who introduced Ship, but I choose not to believe that he was the one who decided on the name.
Well, provided that Guide has access to it and is sufficiently strong enough to do it, it's reasonable to assume that it could make Strigus think he was feeling better. Again, tying into the placebo effect, but you make up your own mind on that.
I was basically just going to wave my hands, honestly, and say Sith Alchemy / Sith Sorcery did it.
That also works, because it has been shown that the meditation sphere, Nagasadao's again, is susceptible to a Sith sorcery when he collapses the supernova of the Empress Theta system, I think. It's been a long time since I've read those comics. He basically uses Sith sorcery to make a star go supernova, which is amplified by his Sith meditation sphere like all of his powers are.
Yeah, not a good dude to be on the receiving end of the wrath of. And yet he was still able to kick the Jedi was still able to kick his ass completely and basically drive his species to extinction until the Old Republic happened.
Yeah. Well, you can argue that it was Ludo Kresh's fault, despite the fact that Ludo Kresh was the more level-headed of the two. It basically came to the fact that Ludo Kresh wanted the Sith Empire to expand within its own borders, and eventually it could come to rival the Republic, or they could become two superpowers at work, sort of like a Russia America type thing. But Nagasadao was just obsessed with war, conquest, glory, blah 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 blah, and we all know what happened after that.
Yeah, I actually find it quite interesting that canon tends to talk about the Sith Empire as being this great and vast thing, like it happens in Knights of the Old Republic 2, for instance, where it's meant to be the true Sith Empire is meant to be this mighty expanse of space that the Republic just simply hasn't noticed. But the classical Sith Empire was never really any bigger than the Caldera, so it's basically like a tiny sector. And then you look at the Republic, which even at that time was 20 or so times the size of it. It was massive. You basically can look at all of the wars throughout history, except maybe for the Jedi Civil War, and turn around and say, yeah, those guys didn't so much lose because of individual heroism, they lost because they made the same mistake that Japan did. They didn't manage to take out America completely before America woke up and said, hey, stop doing that, and stepped on them.
Basically, yes. See, it kind of parallels with the true Sith Empire and the fact that they expanded in mostly uncharted territories. They moved through the unknown regions, conquered minor planets, stripped them of resources, and spent 300 years building up an armada, because at this time the Republic was demilitarizing after the Great Hyperspace War, and it's sort of kind of grown a bit complacent.
Don't you mean the Jedi Civil War?
Yeah, well, they were still demilitarizing after that, and then they kind of remilitarized for the Jedi Civil War and the Mandalorian Wars, blah, 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 blah. Then they demilitarized again after that, which basically meant that the Sith Empire in the early stages of the Great Galactic War steamrolled right over them and took command of basically half the galaxy.
Maybe you can explain something for me, actually. I noticed that when I was reading up on the Sith Emperor, he leads them on a 20-year voyage into the unknown regions to Dromund Kaas, but isn't Dromund Kaas in the Caldera, so it's basically next door or just down the street from Korriban?
Yeah, but he didn't want them to know that. He needed them basically subservient to his will. He was their Moses, basically, and they had, by the time they found quote unquote Dromund Kaas, they were subservient to him. They thought it was a god, basically.
So
they couldn't.
He led them out there, and then he had them all turn around and fly back?
Well, he was pretty much just going in random circles, and the justification was that the Stygian Caldera was so, unnavigatable that they were just going around in circles, and they could play it off as, oh, we don't know where we're going, and the Force will guide us.
Well, I guess technically unknown regions is everything that they didn't know anything about, so Wikipedia wasn't technically lying, but still, 20 years to find the planet down the street. Imagine if Moses led everyone from Egypt and then turned around and led them all back to Alexandria and was like, oh yeah guys, I found the promised land. I imagine some of the pilgrims would have been pretty pissed off. Pilgrims the right term to use there? Oh, it doesn't matter.
Well, the problem is that Moses wasn't incredibly as destructive as Vitiate was, and these people were dumbasses that had just been through a war that nearly wiped out their species, and he was the last bastion of power in their midst to save them, basically.
And then it was what, 1,000 years between then and the events of the Old Republic?
Yep.
Look at this. We started off talking about the Old Republic, then we continued talking about the Old Republic, and now we're talking about the Old Republic again. Let's talk about the meta.
The circle is now complete. Okay, getting back to the Sith meditation sphere thing, could you possibly go into a bit more detail? Because it has been shown in Legends that Ship found the Bainite legacy worthy of its secrets, so why not us?
That is a good point. One that, strictly speaking, I don't have a proper answer to and would implore you not to think too hard about. But some of the internal logic that I was using was, aside from the fact saying that Ship here is a little bit different to Ship in canon because, we can do that. You can always make up something like, oh, the currents of the dark side have changed and it altered his personality, blah, 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 all that. Look at it this way. When he was created, Sith wasn't just a title and it wasn't just a philosophy. It was a people. It had a whole legacy attached to it. That's actually one of the points that he makes to Lucifer when he says you're not worthy. He basically says something like, you scorn your legacy, which, now that I think about it, is not something most people would say in day-to-day parlance, but whatever. So when he looks at a Sith and judges a Sith, he doesn't just say, oh, okay, you follow on with the typical history. It's more cultural things that have carried on and adherence to the past 100,000 years before the Great Hyperspace War. So basically what happened was he was created during Ragnars's reign. He's been filled with 100,000 years of Sith history. He sat out the Great Hyperspace War because they deployed him to go and gather up apprentices and all of that. So he basically went to sleep shortly before the hyperspace war was completely lost, and now he's only just woken up. So for him, his impressions of what is Sith and what is worthy, quote unquote, is more or less what it was 5,000 years ago. So to him, the ideal Sith is what it was 5,000 years ago, an almost tribal creature that reveres the gods and ancestors and fights every day to survive, backstabs those stronger than them so that they can claim the power for themselves, that sort of thing. And one of the big things about the Brotherhood, which I'm sure everyone has noticed, given that it's there in the title, is that they work really well together and nobody stabs each other in the back anymore. Or at least when they do, everybody else turns around and starts punching them in the face repeatedly before they get their heart ripped out. So he kind of looks at that and says, well, okay, you guys have obviously got some of the dark side stuff going, but what makes a Sith is a bit more than just this philosophy of personal power. So I think part of the reason why this ship would have approved of the Bay Knights, since, remember again, this is all justifications that I've made up since I never read Legacy of the Force because it's shit. He would have gone, well, you guys may not be perfect, you guys may not have the blood for it, and you may not be living on Korriban, but you've still got that key underlying tenet of the Sith species, which was the strongest fight to survive. You were always trying to kill each other to make sure that the strongest rise to the top, that sort of thing. And I think I actually remember thinking about it now that I mention it, and thinking that holds for the One Sith as well, because in canon, at the end of the events of Legacy of the Force, the One Sith turn up to try and claim him for themselves. He basically scans one of their memories and says, nah, you guys aren't worthy, I'm going to go piss off and find the lost tribe to throw into a meat grinder. There you go. They're similar but not the same as the Brotherhood in that they're all very much around unity and the rule of one, and they're all perfectly loyal and extensions of the Dark Lord, that sort of thing.
So, there is no one Sith in the Brotherhood, on a personal level, not as a whole, that Guide would have found worthy enough to meet with and say, hey, you've got the right stuff, leave these bozos behind.
Well, that's basically what he was saying to Strigas at the end. You've got the right stuff, leave these bozos behind, and you might actually have a shot at being a good Sith. But part of that could have been that he just took a bit of a shine to him. I mean, you spend 5,000 years trapped in a cage, in a cave, somebody turns up, lets you out, and, can sense the Force. You're probably going to be really, really, really thankful to that person.
That's quite true, yes. So, in conclusion, that means that we are unworthy. This also raises another point. Naga Sadow's meditation sphere is presumably still on Yavin because it was never reclaimed. His battleship was claimed, but his meditation sphere was never reclaimed.
That's true.
And it is noted that he took it with him to Yavin 4. There's just no record of it ever being buried, or if it was ever recovered, or if it had a temple built around it. But I digress. There is also another meditation sphere, for those who are unaware, that belonged to the late Dark Lord, Darth Sidious.
What are you suggesting?
What I'm suggesting is that if Sidious himself is listening, could you clarify for us, is that sphere similar to Naga Sadow's, or is it like Guide and fully sentient, or at least some degree artificially intelligent?
Also, here's probably a good question for you, Zeus. While we're on the subject, where did he get it originally? Because, Yavin 4 had a certain number of excavations and temple rituals going on. You never know. Maybe they found something that wasn't a horrible flesh-eating zombie virus like most of the other Sith archaeologists seem to discover.
Well, presumably he got it from the original Birth of Zen moon, because wasn't that a moon of Ziost?
True, if memory serves, yeah.
And
I
as
don't think
far
he
as
why they were Nogri there, though.
As far as well, they could have been a slave species, because lots of species did wander into the caldera by mistake, mostly Twi'leks.
Yeah, but they were kind of a long way away. Like, they're on the other side of the moor, and I don't think they ever really developed spaceflight.
Well, sleeper ships, it's been established that there were sleeper ships and the tumble hyperdrive. I think it was the Duros that made the tumble hyperdrive, which was...
I thought the Duros made the hyperspace guns. Isn't that just such a gnarly title?
It is. Wait, I'm trying to think here. It was either the Duros or the Corellians that made hyperspace guns, and the other respectively made the tumble hyperdrive.
Well, they're so close to each other that they're like the same planet on the astrography map anyway, so I guess it doesn't matter too much.
Pretty much. So, presumably these Nogri were travelers that somehow got trapped on a Sith world pre-war, blah blah blah, society, slave species. And I think logically you could infer that that's maybe where Zeus got his from, because it's basically right next door to one of the Sith, heartlands.
Well, it could be. Only the big bald man would know for sure, though.
You'll have to clarify that for us.
Mm.
So, now that Ship, or Guide, has effectively run away from us, is he going straight to the lost tribe of Sith to find them and, as you said, throw them into the meat grinder?
Straight to them? No, he's probably going to run around for a bit looking for quote-unquote true Sith, but yeah, he's going to turn up there eventually, because he is more or less the only possible way that they could be introduced into the story.
Right. So, what can we expect from them, if you're allowed to tell us?
Well, there's good news and bad news. The good news is that there are at least 5,000, basically, Sith Knights in the Lost Tribe, as in equivalent to Jedi Knights, guys who can go out, fight with the Force, you can run into them in missions, that sort of thing, which means that we can slaughter them en masse and that we will not even make a dent.
Lovely.
The bad news is that I want to try and make them threatening, so they're probably going to be a little bit smarter and less easy to manipulate than they were in canon, which was extremely.
Hey, Bluff.
I don't know if how many people read the review of Fate of the Jedi that I posted on Reddit and linked to a couple of times, but my god, they are stupid and dumb on basically every level, and I honestly cannot possibly fathom how they were able to survive in isolation for 5,000 years. Look at it this way, they were so stupid that they were trapped on a planet for 5,000 years. 5,000 years ago, we were basically all still living in the desert. Humanity was still living in the desert, that sort of thing. I mean, I know that's a bit of an oversimplification, but you get what I'm trying to say. In 5,000 years, trapped on a planet from a ship that crashed, with access to that ship's resources, with all of its old information, like they explicitly mentioned, they've still got data tapes, that sort of thing. Not once did they manage to achieve even basic spaceflight.
Yay.
You've gone really tinny for a sec. Do you want to play with your microphone? Oh, it just fixed itself.
Okay, is that better now?
Yep. So, yeah, and despite the fact that they weren't able to come up with a basic chemical rocket to get out of the planet's atmosphere, within 2 years they're all able to learn how to fly modern starships, so who even knows what's going on there?
That's some pretty Battlefield Earth level of shit.
Yeah, or don't you mean Independence Day?
No, I mean Battlefield Earth.
Oh yeah, with the Harriers. Oh god.
Yep.
I was referring more to how the alien technology is somehow susceptible to a Mac, but I guess that's not really applicable. I'm sorry, Independence Day Resurgence came out and I work in a cinema, so I've been exposed to that shitty movie a bunch of times.
I was learning to conquer planets before you were learning to spell your name!
John Travolta. What a cock.
You know what, I think we should make him into a Lost Tribe character.
John Travolta.
Yeah. His character from Battlefield Earth, Charles.
I mean, he'd probably be a bit more interesting than their Grand Lord is in canon. Again, going back to that review, the Grand Lord is a fantastic example of them telling rather than showing, because throughout the whole series they're saying he's so incredibly powerful, nobody would ever dare to cross him. Oh, he's going to take out this upstart senator now that we've conquered Coruscant. They stand absolutely no chance, that sort of thing. He's useless on completely every level. Like, we never even get to see him use the Force once. He basically says, I'm going to go and kill this senator now, and the next time he turns up, he's ahead, because it turns out that senator was Abeloth.
Isn't this the same guy that resisted the mind influence of Abeloth, or is that another lord I'm thinking of?
That's him. I'll give it to him, but it's not so much resisting as the Wikipedia description implies that he does some sort of mental torture to her, when in the book basically all he says is, you will never be loved, and she freaks out and blows up half a city.
Well then.
She kills millions of Lost Tribe Sith, incidentally, so there's at least millions of them that can be killed without anybody in the series really caring.
Well then.
It's a success on every level. I will say this though, in canon, it's basically just the Lost Tribe. They've got a lot of numbers, as I said, there's at least 5,000 of them explicitly identified to be combat capable. Then there's millions more of them living on the planet who may or may not be Force sensitive. So it's basically just them fighting against the Republic and the Jedi, and they're sticking in the shadows, but they're building up this great big war fleet, which consists of 200-year-old ships and would probably be blown up in about 3 seconds by the average Imperial Star Destroyer, but that's beside the point. I think that's kind of stupid. So they will be smart enough to enlist help. Now, whether or not they get blown up a few times beforehand, I haven't made up my mind, but I have located a couple of potential allies for them who are vast in number and very well versed in combat, so I'm actually really looking forward to seeing what I can get away with there.
Lovely.
So, anyway, happy speculating, because they're not going to turn up for quite a while. I was more or less laying the groundwork, and I'm working on stuff in the background now to see what I can do with them, but unless, I don't know, we jump forward 5 years, they're probably not going to turn up for a little bit. Since they need to, learn how to leave their planet, since if they can't figure it out in 5,000 years, it's probably going to take them a couple of years to figure it out, even with the meditation sphere helping them.
Yeah.
We went from the first controlled air flight, we went from the Wright brothers to landing on the moon within, less than 70 years? And yet in 5,000 years, these guys can't take a crashed starship and figure out how to get out of the atmosphere. And it's not like the planet they've crash landed on can't be that bad for metals and minerals and oils and crap needed to fly a rocket, because they're somehow able to survive and have a high-tech society made of fucking crystal for 5,000 years.
Yeah, that always struck me as odd. I mean, you would think that they'd be able to repair their ship, surely.
Well, they somehow don't even manage to do that until ship comes along, and then they're like, oh yeah, now we're finally going to get stuff from the other ships that we've captured and use it to repair this ship.
Okay, so here's the thing.
They have ship that is 5,000 years old flying. They basically have the equivalent of a Derafin. And as you would well know, Derafins are not very effective in modern combat.
Not very well. Not unless, if they're 5,000 years old and they've been around for 5,000 years, they're not going to work. Unless they're up to modern spec, they're barely going to be flyable.
Yep. On a related note, have you ever noticed that Yaru Corson, who is the guy, I literally just looked up his name, I don't actually know that off the top of my head, the guy who was the captain of the Omen when it crashed, he looks like a potato? Seriously, I sent you a link and I'll put it up in the podcast. Look at his face.
Yeah. Oh. Yeah. That's a potato.
Yeah. It kind of looks like somebody has had a human face described to them, but has never actually seen it, and they've tried to draw it. And nothing about this picture seems human. It all just seems off.
This is some serious Uncanny Valley stuff going on here.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a pose a human being could reasonably take.
It's like a Madame Tussauds wax figure.
Yeah, although he has got heterochromia, it looks like, so that's pretty cool. Or maybe he doesn't. No, he doesn't.
Kinda looks like it.
It looks like it, but it's not when you look closely.
I would really like to know what the hell that is he's wielding. It looks like a piece of tapestry coming out of a pipe.
Well, obviously they've tried to take a jagged machete and electrify it. And you know what I really like? It's electrified, but the hilt is made of metal.
It has to be insulated. There's no way that this is the Lost Tribe we're talking about. Yes, they'd be that stupid.
Yeah. Maybe that's how he was assassinated, or however he died. Somebody was like, here, pose for this really awesome photo. Okay, now hold this, it'll make you look awesome.
Is that why his hair's standing up on end? Well, no, now that you say that, look, the right-hand side of his face kind of looks like he's having a stroke, almost. Like,
oh god, it does.
Look at the eye, it's kind of drooping, and his lips curled up. Like, it's half smiling, half not smiling. He's having a stroke. This thing is killing him.
I wonder if that was going through the artist's head when he was drawing this, because if it was, this is art. This is the very example of postmodernism.
You can really see the conveyance of suffering and just sheer idiocy of having a electrified tapestry coming out of a tin.
The blue of the electricity and the glow on his body represents how he feels blue because he's depressed at having crashed with a ship full of the dumbest fucking idiots in the Star Wars galaxy. He's not smiling. If you look at him, look at those eyes. Those are the eyes of a man who is screaming. He's screaming inside his own head and nobody can hear him.
Everything about this guy seems really, really off. One ear is larger than the other and is ever so slightly sticking out. One of his cheekbones appears to be sloped, and the other one, he doesn't appear to have a cheekbone.
His eyes are looking in slightly different directions.
One is slightly larger than the other and is drooping.
His nose is like being pulled to the side of his face. He's got a Harrison Ford nose.
One side of his mouth is kind of sneering, and the other side is smiling.
Look at his mouth. It looks like the bottom lip has been drawn slightly to the side. Look down the line of his face. The center of his lips and his cleft and his nose and that little bit above your mouth, like the little indent, they're not in line.
They're not. If you look at it a bit closely, his bottom lip is thicker on one side than it is on the other.
Oh, you're right too. So this guy is clear. He looks like plastic. He's had plastic surgery and it's gone horribly wrong.
He's had too much collagen filler and now he's having a stroke because he's holding a piece of electrified tapestry.
Oh god, I feel sorry for this guy now. He's probably just got the sound of silence permanently playing in his head.
Except he doesn't want to be surrounded by familiar faces and worn out places. Like his ship.
Hello, darkness, my old friend.
What a shame.
I've come to talk with you.
What a shame. This poor guy, I mean, look at him. Imagine the shit he's had to deal with, like, these fucking Seths. I mean, I swear to God, the engineers can't do anything right. He crashes on this planet and the engineer's like, duh, I don't know what to do, have my ship. And then they say, oh, by the way, we're in this amazing planet, we just need to fool the locals and they think we're their gods. So here, I'm gonna stick this piece of tapestry at the end of this blaster that I've suddenly just ripped everything out of. Look, no, don't worry about the sparks, that's fine, just hold it like this. And that, categorically, is why Exless is the best at space chess.
You know, I never thought you'd convince me given his intellect stat, but I can't really argue with that.
Yeah, I mean, who knew, right? Who knew, right?
Yeah, I'm a bit jealous now. Well, anyway, I think we've probably waffled on enough, and with the with the time travel, we have gone a bit over our intended time, so we probably should start looking at wrapping up.
That's a great idea. Let's wrap up.
So, any closing remarks?
Closing remarks. To summarize, the Lost Tribe are still shit, but hopefully they can be a credible threat. And the moral of this story is, if you're going to pose, please don't hold a piece of electrified tapestry.
Anyway, so that about brings this podcast to a close. As I may have mentioned before the time travel, you may have also noticed Lucifer is not in this podcast. We are still waiting on him to get his computer situation sorted out, so we just figured we'd put out something that was originally intended to be about an hour long, just to tide you guys over, but we love hearing ourselves talk so much we decided, just keep going. Just keep talking.
Yeah, what the hey.
You all love it so much.
But, if one of you fine, wonderful people would like to be a guest, just let us know, and we'd be happy to have you on the next show, well, at least until Lucifer comes along.
So, if you want to participate, and I like you, send me a PM or an email if you stalk me and somehow I've tracked down my email address, or alternatively, message me on Facebook if you stalk me and have somehow tracked down my personal name. And if I don't like you, you can just go ahead and delete the email, or personal message, or Facebook message. We should probably say goodbye.
We should probably say goodbye.
Don't say goodbye. I hate goodbyes.
And, look at me! I'm the Lost Tribe! I'm holding an electrified tapestry!